Hi, my name's Andy. Welcome to Really Random Reads. Today, some thoughts for you about this John le Carré novel from 1986, A Perfect Spy. I relatively recently uploaded a video on this channel where I spoke about finding a load of John le Carré first editions in a local charity shop. This was one of them. Annoyingly, I've actually made this video before and accidentally deleted it, so this is take two. And if you have heard of this book before, maybe you've heard it because you've read it, but if you have heard of this book before and haven't read it, it might well be because it's regarded, including by John le Carré himself, as his most autobiographical novel. I recently saw a channel that was talking about John le Carré books, and it was talking about this one, The Pigeon Tunnel, which is John le Carré writing about his life. It's non-fiction. He writes about himself as a writer, but also, different anecdotes, different things that have happened to him in life. If you ever see a John le Carré interview, you will probably realise quite quickly he is a very gifted raconteur, a very gifted storyteller. Now, the point that this booktuber was making though, and unfortunately I can't remember which one it was, you get, and I'm inclined to agree, a much more vivid and bizarrely honest depiction or exploration of John le Carré's actual life in his fiction than you do in his non-fiction such as this. Let's come back to A Perfect Spy. As I say, widely regarded as his most autobiographical novel. And that was why I enjoyed this one so much, because it caught me in a very, very unexpected way. I'm going to do a spoiler section at the end of this video, and that is the part where I'm going to talk about how I got so deceived and taken off guard. However, for now, let's start at the beginning with what this book is actually about. So it's set in the 80s and it's a standalone novel. It's not like John le Carré's novels where the circus, which is the spy organisation, keeps popping up with characters like George Smiley. This is entirely standalone. So it's the 80s and there is a middle-aged male spy, and then it's a dual narrative, something which in any kind of novel I often struggle with. You have the modern day element in the 80s, you then have the bit that's like I always get this German word wrong, it's the coming of age story, Bildungsroman, I'll put it on the screen. The coming of age story of the younger man, the younger, now middle-aged man, and how he came to be a spy, and title, bit of a giveaway, why he was so perfect for that role. In essence, he was so perfect, or in large part, because his dad was a con man. We also know that John le Carré's father, real name David Cornwall, John le Carré was an alias used by David Cornwall. So David Cornwall's father, Ronnie, was an infamous and in many ways very successful con man. Times in his life when he was very affluent on top. Famous-ish photograph of him, for example, with the British pop star Cliff Richard back in the day. Association with the infamous Kray twins, who were gangsters, bullies working out of East London or operating out of East London. So yes, David Cornwall's father, this infamous con man, who also though had times in life when he was bankrupt and in prison. So the parts of this novel which are about the spy as a young person, you can see very heavily are influenced by things that almost certainly happened to David Cornwall in his early life. The middle-aged character in this sits down to write the story of his life. Usually I cannot stand that, or that's maybe too strong a way of putting it. Usually I kind of roll my eyes when I find that in novels. I find it a bit self-indulgent, a bit of a dated trope. However, it's brilliant for David Cornwall kind of sharing with the reader his process, his craft, and some of his views on writing. So actually I really enjoyed it here. At the very beginning of this story is like the inciting incident, the stakes, the threat is that there has potentially been a betrayal. The protagonist's father, the dad, has also died at the same time as this sort of alleged suspected betrayal has gone down, and it's looking like he's been cleared from it. But then his dad dies and he just takes himself off and off he goes and he goes to a small seaside hotel back in England and sits down to write this book. That's as much as I'm going to give in terms of story and plot, except for the section where I'm going to talk about spoilers. Having read quite a few John le Carré books now, here's some common things that I feel reading them, and this would be a case in point. For me, many John le Carré books do not click in. I don't feel as though I can't possibly leave them until the first 100 pages. So if you take that do not finish sort of loose rule that some people have, maybe around the 30-page mark or the 50-page mark, this is a tricky one, because if I was to have followed that, I'm pretty certain I would have abandoned this book. It was a load of characters I didn't particularly like, to some extent wasn't particularly interested in. I sort of seen the unpleasant but successful sort of misanthropic type of characters and that sort of thing before. Selfish, self-involved. Why would I want to spend time with those people? After 100 pages, I really did. And the main reason that I wouldn't have left this book unfinished is something I'm going to talk about in the spoiler section. Another sort of, so if that's the first one, a lot of John le Carré novels don't kick in for me until 100 pages. Another reason, or another thing I've noticed that goes really well in hand with that first one, because that first one might make you think, well, I don't even want to bother then, is that I think most John le Carré novels are written, or certainly work for me at least, best on the reread. So I get a lot from them on the first read, and I could probably easily talk for at least half an hour about this book. I'm not going to, don't worry. But it's on the rereads that I get this sort of richer, deeper level from them. I need to understand the story first, and the stories in John le Carré are often very complex, and he doesn't spoon feed his readers. And then once you have that, you begin to appreciate their richness in terms of the different levels of the characters, the deceptions, the self-deceptions, all of those type of things that are going on, most on the rereads. Finally, I thought this book was topical in two ways. First one, because late 80s, early 90s, Cold War winding down and then kind of ended. John le Carré left sort of, his fans wondering, what's he going to write about now? Can he actually continue to write novels? Perhaps, I haven't read biographies of John le Carré, but I don't know, perhaps even wondering that himself. And he did, he wrote successful novels about other things. However, in modern times, in 2025, Russia very much back in the news, the relations between the West and Russia. It was, in a grim way, really interesting and very topical for me, or I felt as such, reading this now, which is about the Cold War. Second way in which this is very topical, David Cornwell, John le Carré's dad, very charismatic man, so we're talking real life. In this story, the main character, the protagonist, and the protagonist's father, particularly the father, both very charismatic and charming people. This book, for me, was an interesting warning, an interesting showing the problem well, about the dangers of charm and charisma and how easy it is for people to be taken in, even people who think they probably wouldn't be taken in. Spoiler section now, folks. So if you're leaving me here, thank you for watching the video and have a great day, evening, wherever you are. When you hear about this book, what you really hear most is it's David Cornwell's most autobiographical novel. It's John le Carré's most autobiographical novel. Massive trap for me there, because I began to think of this novel as autobiography. I began to think that there wouldn't be things happening in this book that hadn't happened to David Cornwell in real life. I am very interested in reading about traitors, basically people who have done traitorous things, be it in terms of non-fiction or fiction. I didn't think this was one of those type of novels, because I knew that David Cornwell, unless he's hidden it really well, past the point of his death, I knew that David Cornwell was not a traitor, or to use a less loaded word, not somebody who was working for the Russian intelligence services pretending to work for the British ones. He was not a Kim Philby. He was not one of the sort of Cambridge Five, the Cambridge spy ring. He was a loyal British agent who went on to have a career as a successful writer. You get the middle-aged character in this who sits down, having had a successful spy career, and starts to write about his life. I kind of just assumed he was going to be a stand-in for David Cornwell. I kind of assumed that all the subtle hints and the not so subtle ones, that he might be a traitor, that he really wasn't, and that really wasn't the point of this book. It was. And when you read this one, The Pigeon Tunnel, which is David Cornwell in one of the essays talking about the challenges that he had writing A Perfect Spy, we learn that one of the challenges he had was he fell into the trap of making it too much like real life when he was writing about his dad. What enabled him to turn it into a novel was to take the central character, the dad's son, so in real life him, but in this book, Magnus Pym, to make that character even worse. So I read this thinking the middle-aged man is going to be like a stand-in for David Cornwell, maybe even like a George Smiley type character. Not a George Smiley, but basically somebody loyal. Big mistake. Very clever, I think, because the main character in this book tricks, deceives all of the people around him. He deceived me. I didn't even realise it was happening. It was so subtle, I didn't realise it until my wallet was gone, sort of thing. Another reason why I really want to reread this and why I would get more out of it on a reread. So there you go. There's some thoughts about A Perfect Spy. I'm in two minds to say, if you haven't read John le Carré before, don't start with this one. I was tempted to say that, but then I just kind of think sometimes I feel confident giving those recommendations. Sometimes it feels a bit presumptuous. If you haven't read John le Carré before, and God knows I've probably done enough in this sort of video to put you off him unintentionally, then try this. You know, my recommendation as a starting point would be something like The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, or Tinker Tailor Soldier's Spy. But who knows, for many people, this is their favourite John le Carré novel. Thanks for watching. If you have a moment to give it a thumbs up if you like the video, or subscribe, that would be great. And either way, have a great time. Hope you're keeping well. Bye.